this last bit of the meeting is really to think about how do we use the concepts that Monica and I have been presenting to help develop and implement more effective projects in the field. So based on the food system journey and the food system concepts that we've also been sharing with you. So just to start, the notion in Monica's earlier slide, you remember the ring of process that has to happen. First of all, you need to map the system. And how do we do that? There are a number of ways to do that, but one of them is to think about typologies. So just a few slides about some different typologies for how people can define the system in which they are working, in which they have interest. The first is common to many, I'm sure, the agrarian transition, where you have a range of situations depending on how the farming system has developed, ranging from very rural and traditional subsistence farming on one end, right the way through to industrial and consolidated systems at the other end, and identifying where your system lies in this spectrum is a useful thing to do. The WWF put out a report recently, which was very valuable. They based this on 6 variables, which are in the purple boxes. And these were chosen because from WWF's point of view, which of course is a biodiversity conservation organization, they were using a lens which will consider the impact on achieving climate and biodiversity goals. But it's also useful for influencing the trade-offs that Monica was talking about, that the country, the policy process has to juggle when implementing and developing and implementing a policy. So here are 6 things that they felt were important to consider. Again, what they did was to matrix these 6 things, which are the rows, against 3 types of country. Now, there's a lot on this slide, but it's to show the process. So they had what they call type 1 countries, Brazil and Colombia as examples, type 2, Kenya, and type 3, the UAE. And for each of those 6 variables on each of the rows, they describe situation in these countries. So this is a mapping exercise. They're describing how the system is operating against those variables. So this again is a typology. And they further added some other aspects, which was the per capita greenhouse gas emission for the countries, the per capita biodiversity loss, and the per capita calorie intake. So again, this is a way of classifying the countries because the data is available at the national level. Those of you who are part of the Food System Learning Journey workshops will remember our presentation of the food systems dashboard, which again is another way of analyzing the situation in a country. The rows are different countries, this time for Southeast Asia and South Asia, and the whole string of variables clustered into food environment, supply chain environment, and nutrition outcomes are there to see. And again, this is a way of assessing where your situation lies against all those different variables. Most of the country data, most of the data we have is at national level. It's therefore complicated to say, what does this mean for the region? And you can see the diversity across the region in this example. So coming up with a statement as, how do you define the food system of Southeast Asia is really very challenging, because some bits of the food system will be extremely well advanced and other bits will be very rural. So we just need to recognize the challenge of that, but we can use cluster analysis like this is showing to give us a feeling for what's going on in the region. Here it was quite obvious that the cost of legumes, nuts and seeds was pretty good, unlikely to be a challenge for most of the countries, whereas the average proportion of natural vegetation embedded in agricultural land was likely to be a real challenge for most of the countries. So that's the sort of way one can do this. But what I'd like to do now is just present a little cartoon that builds up to show how we bring together the resilience and the scenario work in relation to transforming the food system outcomes in the way I was earlier describing. So the goal in town, the goal we're trying to do is to transform the food system outcomes from less good to more good. You can define how you wish, but what we have to do is bring all of these three elements, food, socioeconomic, food security, environment, bring them all up a little bit, but recognizing that a given intervention may be challenging for one or more of those three boxes, even though it's targeting one of the other ones. As I've mentioned, in order to transform the outcomes from less good to more good, we need to adapt the activities. And how do we do that from a project point of view? Much of the SDC work is aimed at this diagram at the top, particularly the agricultural sector. But having gone around the workshop series with many of you, it's quite clear that some projects are actually spanning the whole diagram, thinking about the health outcomes, thinking about the logistics and the rest. So that's good. But how do we improve those projects? Well, what we need to do is to think about what interventions can we use to enhance the resilience of the system to the shocks and stresses. What will they look like? Who's responsible for designing them? Who's responsible for implementing them? And this is where the project planning and delivery process has to interact with the context of the project. What is the national or regional social, economic, political context in this way? And this is where you need to be able to map the project using a typology which is fit for purpose and bring that continually into the project planning and delivery. So much so good. However, when the food system activities are adapted to enhance the resilience or improve the sustainability or to improve the health outcomes, whatever it is you're trying to do, we are in effect changing the contexts. And this is because it's a system. And when you interrupt or manage the system, there is a consequence. The outcomes change, normally for a desired direction, and this means the context changes. So you need to go back to thinking about the project planning. Now, bring in the idea of scenarios. Shocks and stresses will be affecting the dynamic, and the scenario work that Monica discussed can be very good for exploring plausible futures in the way she described, to say what might it mean for the contexts? How might the contexts change given these different plausible futures? And therefore, how should the project planning and delivery be reconsidered? Or one can say we constantly need to reconsider the contexts in relation to the scenario storylines. This, of course, means that we need to reassess the project planning and delivery given the plausible futures. But a further technique is what's called the normative approach that Monica was discussing, where you say, so what outcomes and futures are desirable, and how do we get there given the range of different types of plausible futures in which we might be operating? So the idea of this diagram is to bring together the food system concepts, the activities and the outcomes, the notion of project planning in relation to the exploring the future with scenarios in such a way that we can enhance the resilience of the system outcomes, because that's what we're really trying to do. We want to transform the outcomes over time from less good to more good.